Today we're going to look at economic geography. So economic geography deals with how people earn a living and how they use resources. There are 4 different sections of the economy. First one is primary, and in the primary section of the economy, you use natural resources directly. That's things like farming, fishing, forestry, herding, and mining. So if you're directly working with natural resources, then you are part of the primary section of the economy. Then there's the secondary section of the economy, and that is where you use raw materials to produce or manufacture something new. So you take wheat that's been harvested and you make it into flour, or you take metal that has been mined and you create it into an object as a welder. Tertiary is where you're providing services to people or businesses. For example, teachers, doctors, truck drivers, restaurant staff are all part of the tertiary section of the economy. Then there's quaternary, which is the processing or distributing of information. So a computer programmer would be part of the quaternary sector of the economy. So then, what section of the economy do you or your parents work in? So what of those 4 sectors, which of those does your family work in? Okay. The next thing that we look at when we are considering economic geography is the different types of economic systems. So there's 4 main types of economic systems. The first one is traditional or a subsistence economy, and that's where people are making goods that they themselves are using for either themselves or their families. There's not a lot of trade that goes on in a traditional economy. You may or may not have some trading between 2 different cultures that both have traditional economies, but typically anything you make, you are going to use up. Then there's a market economy, which is sometimes known as capitalism, and that's where people and businesses will privately, the individuals are going to choose what they want to buy and what they want to sell. So the choice of how different decisions are made in the economy in a market system is done by individual people. And then the next type of economic system is a command economy. Communism is the main type of command economy. So that's where government decides what's going to be made, how much is going to be made, what price it's going to be at, and thus who gets to use the products that's made. So in a command economy, the government's making all of the economic decisions, whether it's communist or a variation of a different type of command economy. And then there's mixed economy, which is a mixture where you're combining aspects of a market economy where individuals will own and make their decisions, and then command economy where the government is involved. So typically in a mixed economy, you're going to see that there are regulations that the government will get involved with the economy, but individuals are still going to make a lot of the decisions in most mixed economies. Most countries around the world have mixed economic systems. So knowing that, which type of economy do you think the U.S. has? Okay, so these are some important just vocabulary for economic geography. GNP is the gross national product. Gross in finance terms is another word for total. So you have the total value of goods and services, that's the breakdown of the word product, that a country makes in a year. So gross national product, the total value of goods and services a country makes in a year. And then there's gross domestic product, which is the goods and services that are created inside the country's borders. So the difference is if it's made inside the borders of the country, for example, inside the borders of the US, then it's part of GDP, gross domestic product. If, however, it's made outside the US, even if it's a US company like McDonald's, then McDonald's in China is part of China's GDP, but it's part of the US's GNP because McDonald's is a US-based company, but McDonald's in China would be producing their product in China. Industrialization is the process by which manufacturing becomes widespread. So where there's factories and they start to be kind of everywhere, that's the idea of industrialization. Standard of living measures how good life is. So it uses things like personal income, levels of education, food consumption, birth rates, death rates, literacy rates. A lot of times you can think of standard of living also in terms of material wealth. So all of those things listed are going to be part of what allows people to accumulate material wealth within their lifetime. Developed countries are countries that have high levels of industrialization and high standard of living, whereas developing countries are countries that have lower industrialization and lower standards of living. So, based on that, is the US a developed country or a developing country? So some urban geography, we have a few different points here, and I want you to think about, where would you put a city? Would you put it where number 1 is? Would you put it where number 2 is? Where number 3 is? Where number 4 is? Or where number 5 is? If you were going to build a city of the places in this picture, where would you put your city? So in kind of thinking about that picture, domestication is this idea of taming wild plants and animals and making them easier to use as humans. Urbanization is the growth of the proportion of people living in towns and cities. So urbanization is where you're having more people live in towns and cities than in countryside. So there's key factors. You have to be close to resources. It has to be very easy to trade. There have to be good transportation routes. And it needs to be easily defended. So as you look at the different points, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, then you're going to see that some of them are closer to different resources. Some of them are going to be easier to defend. Some of them have very easy trading, and some of them are more difficult for trading. So 4 is pretty easy to defend on the top of a mountain, but it's harder to trade. Whereas when you're in a valley and you're by a river and by roads, it's very easy to trade, but it may not be as easy to defend. So think about, where would you choose to put your city and why? Okay, so number 1 is river crossings, so that's good for trade and resources, like I was saying. Number 2, this is a harbor, represents harbors, good for trading, resources. Harbors are fairly defensible. It's pretty easy to defend a number of ways. For number 3, this is a river delta. Remember we talked about landforms delta. That's a river delta. There's usually very good soil, and it's usually very good for trading, so it's very easy to get in and out of a river delta. Hilltop is very easy for defense, but it's difficult for trading. And a mountain pass is also, which is right here, kind of in between these mountains, number 5. It's easy to defend, not so easy for trading, and maybe or maybe not near other resources. Okay, so urban problems. Common urban problems include social problems, housing, transportation, and environmental issues. So I want you to think about some examples you can think of for problems that are in urban and city areas. So in some cases, when you get more people together, a lot of times you'll see that crime goes up. People are going to have conflicts with each other. The more of you put in one place, the more conflicts there are. Environmental problems, that smog, really bad. Problems with finances and poverty sometimes are associated with urban problems. Traffic and just being able to get places, transportation, and the like. So think about some additional problems that you can think of that are urban problems. Rural geography. There's a few different types of agriculture that we will talk about several times depending on what different areas have. So subsistence agriculture is where families produce enough food for their own needs. So they are subsisting, they are continuing to sustain what they need to survive. Pastoralism is simply that you're herding animals, and herding is farming, domesticating animals. Market-oriented agriculture is where farmers are going to grow produce that they sell to consumers. So maybe you keep a very small portion of what you grow in a market-oriented agriculture for yourself, but mostly you're going to produce crops that you're going to sell to others for market-oriented agriculture, whereas subsistence agriculture, you're almost exclusively going to use everything you grow for yourself. You may have a couple of crops left over that you can sell to someone else, but mostly you're going to just be making enough to eat for your own family. So then what type of agriculture do we mostly have in the US?